That doesn't make any sense.
Important to
You're
me.
listening to what?
That is
Would not
so
listen
so
to
what
what
are you
man.
talking about? No.
Because what we're trying to build here is a set of community values and connections between us that will allow us to have conversations, not just this year during political season, but going forward on a whole range of issues.
It's also very important to listen to perspectives that I disagree with. You know, a couple of things happen. Either I learn much more why I believe what I believe, or I start to understand that other perspective a lot better, and now I can speak to both sides.
But to walk around and have this sense that you have the right for everything to fit you, then we're going to have chaos, because we each can't have that. Because what I want is not what Jennifer wants or what Jessica wants. But if yet we say that's what the world has to be, it's going to be chaotic.
When we have the opportunity to engage and get to know one another beyond a surface level and really be able to develop a sense of shared experience, lots of good stuff comes from that.
That's what I call being pre-offended. I won't even wait for you to offend me. I'm just going to assume you're going to offend me. So for me, the question becomes, how do we change that? How do we, at the very least, create the incentive to just engage?
You know, one of the issues that in the country is something called perceptual polarization. We think we're much more different than we are. We think it's impossible to talk to people who are different than us. And that's really low-hanging fruit, because those are both completely incorrect.
All of us have a responsibility to treat each other respectfully, to demand civility, to take the tone down, to object to what you're seeing on social media, and to elect people that represent what you want to see. But I think it needs to start in our communities, where we need to stand up to this lack of respect, treating each other with dignity.
Good evening. How's everybody doing? Good. The video presentation really sets the stage for tonight's community conversation, and really covers the key values that we think we need to effectively participate in restitching the fabric of our democracy, the title of today's presentation, which is our discussion topic, and also how we engage as active citizens in our democracy. This is something that's really central and important to us here at Western, and I guess I should skip for a minute and say I'm Ed Montgomery, in case you don't know who I am, and I'm the president of Western Michigan. This conversation, these issues are something that's been really important for us as a university, and WeTalk, that initiative really promoting civil discourse, is helping us advance. I'm really proud of a recent ranking of universities in terms of free speech and the ability to have conversations, and we're 21st in the country. The next highest Michigan school is 72nd, and that's the guys in green up the road. So you being here represents that commitment, that shared value that we have as a campus, to being able to have those kind of conversations and to have that open exchange. And so we're trying to build on that as we go forward. So I want to both thank the WeTalk team, Margaret, where's Margaret, and others who played an essential role in bringing it together. Obviously, our friends here in the Bernhardt Center, the Western Student Association, all of you. Without you, it would not have been possible to have this event today. I want to make sure I thank Dr. Lauren Foley, who's moderating today's discussion. And we're really, really appreciative of the partnership that we have with the Fetzer Institute. It was established earlier this year. Again, they've helped make possible programs like we're having here tonight. So I want to make sure I thank them. In a moment, President Chung Kid-sun from the Western Student Association will formally introduce our speakers, Manu Meel and Eboo Patel, our honored guest. I want to thank everybody for coming across the campus this week, and Manu and Eboo particularly for helping us live out our values and have these foundational moments on the campus. Our devotion to the pursuit of knowledge, to free exchange of ideas, and to engaging in discourse in a manner that helps us grow. You can have conversations. We've all seen them. All you got to do is turn on the TV every night, and you can see people yelling at each other. But to actually have conversations where you learn from each other is a rare entity. It's an area that concerns our country. There was a recent opinion poll that was put out from the 19th from the 19th News that was done in September. And they asked people to rank what do they think are the most important issues for this election. Tied for first were two items. One was the economy. Doesn't surprise anybody. The second, which was also up there, was the state of our democracy. The two biggest issues the public have and are concerned about for this country are the state of our democracy and the state of the economy. And it's a telling statement, because I bet you if you'd done this poll 5, 10, 15 years ago, the state of our democracy would not have been answered the question. And so that's tied to our ability to have these kinds of conversations, to have those kinds of engagements. I believe we can employ the commitments to having that honest dialogue here on campus and in our everyday lives to advance our democracy, and to refuse to allow our differences to divide us. They're real. We're not saying give up and pretend to be something other than who you are. You need to be who you authentically are, but let's not let it divide us. Let's continue to have what makes university special, the ability to consider ideas, to marshal evidence, to marshal arguments, to debate, to push, to stretch each other, to go forward. That's what makes a university a special place. That's what makes Western a special place. That's what we have to individually and collectively continue to commit to, because it's easy to just dismiss. It's easy not to listen to other people. The hard part is to sit there, even when you're angry, and listen and engage in that conversation. But that's what it takes to make our democracy real. So tonight's community conversation, like all of our WeTalk programs, are designed to enlighten us, to make us think, to equip us, to help us stitch, as it were. So please participate in the conversation. This is an interactive dialogue. Be open to considering ideas and even thoughts that presented here that may be different from your own. Perhaps leave more committed to the ideas that you already have. Be more committed, however, to the idea of engaging in difficult conversations and holding with people who hold different views. Even when there's not common ground to be found, the mere exchange of ideas has great value. It makes us grow. As was pointed out by Jessica Schwartz, it makes us consider why we hold the values we hold even more dearly, or it makes us reflect. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I don't understand the other perspective as well as I thought it did, and leaves us more enlightened. So having these civil dialogues, having these exchanges may sound easy for me to say. I appreciate that it's not. But it takes a community to have that commitment, and I'm so proud that we at Western have that commitment. And so I will turn it over to Chung Kid-sun to introduce our today's speakers, and thank you for coming to tonight's show.
Thank you, Dr. Montgomery. How's everyone doing? Good. I'm just going to introduce myself again. I'm Chan Kit. I'm the student body president for this academic year. The Western Student Association, or WSA, is a student government at Western Michigan University, and we serve to unify students, amplify their voices, and voting on issues that affect students, and generally, we represent students. As briefly mentioned by President Montgomery, WSA supports the values that WeTalk advocates: diversity, open inquiry, respectful engagement, and understanding of our free speech rights and responsibilities. Today, we will learn new perspective about these ideas from two national civic leaders in a discussion that will be moderated by Dr. Lauren Foley, Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science and the Director of the Capital Internship Program at Western Michigan University. Dr. Foley is the author on the basics of race, legal resistance, and compliance in the United States history and politics. Her work has also appeared in studies in law, politics, and society, and the Journal of Law and Education. She was admitted into Michigan Bar Association in 2009. Thank you, Dr. Foley. Today, WMU, along with Fetzer Institute and Columbus community, are very honored to have Eboo Patel and Manu Meel with us. Eboo Patel is a civic leader who believes that religious diversity is an essential and inspiring dimension of American democracy. Named one of the America's best leaders by US News and World Report, Eboo is founder and president of Interfaith America, the leading interfaith organization in the United States. Under its leadership, Interfaith America has worked with governments, universities, private companies, and civic organizations to make faith a bridge of cooperation rather than a barrier of division. Eboo also served on the President Obama's inaugural Faith Council, has given hundreds of keynote addresses, and has written 5 books, including We Need to Build Field Notes for Diverse Democracy. He is an Ashoka Fellow and holds a doctorate in the sociology of religion from Oxford University, where he studied on a Rhodes Scholarship. Thank you to This Is a Bookstore and BookBug. I've not been there before. I'm going to go there as well. For being with us today to host a book signing table. Please see Eboo there after the event to pick up an autographed copy. Thank you, Eboo. Manu Meel is an aspiring social entrepreneur who is passionate about empowering young people. In response to experiencing the anger and violent protests Manu Meel witnessed as a freshman on the University of California, Berkeley campus in 2017, over a planned visit by right-wing provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos, Meel became passionate about empowering young people to bridge divides. Manu believes that the biggest threat to American democracy is polarization. So he founded the BridgeUSA, the largest and fastest growing student movement to bridge differences and change how we talk politics. In 2022, Manu was recognized on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for leading BridgeUSA, which now has chapters on more than 50 college and 24 high school campuses, including the University of Notre Dame, University of Colorado, and UC Berkeley. Manu contributes to several news outlets, works on pro-democracy efforts nationally, and advises political leaders on reducing polarization. He currently serves on the boards of Convergence, American Promise, and Bridge Alliance, and he is a member of the Monticello Youth Advisors Committee. In the past, Manu interned as an associate in the venture capital firm Amplo and at the Department of State as a political analyst in counterterrorism. His work has been featured in the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Washington Post, and other media platforms. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Chankit, for your introduction. I have had Chankit in class. He's a fantastic representative of our wonderful students here at Western, so I was thrilled to see that you were going to participate in this event, too. I'm Professor Lauren Foley in the Political Science Department. I also run our internships program. I won't bore you with my research interests because I want to get to this conversation, but how we engage students civically, both in political science as a discipline and in higher education and universities is very near and dear to the service work I do here at Western and also my own research. So thank you to Jeff Brenneman and WeTalk for inviting me to be a part of this panel tonight. I also got to read this incredible book, which is very exciting to someone who loves books as I do. And I will gear my questions, they come from the book, but I think that they're relevant both to the work that you both do. So I hope that you both will chime in and answer them. In Eboo's book, he begins a chapter with an anecdote from Sarah Lawrence University, but it really could have come out of any college campus. And it was a moment of protest, of what people call cancel culture these days, where activists disrupted an event with their messages and did not want to engage or hear what the speakers had to say. You reason, Eboo, that instead, a campus should be a community of what he calls considerate conversation. And my question to both of you is, how can students, faculty, university leaders, and administrators, how can we promote that kind of consideration in our dialogue with both with people we think agree with us and also with those that don't? What steps can we take to become, in your words, civic spaces that specialize in treating people, or teaching people rather, how to engage in conflicts through language instead of through disruption and violence?
Thank you. So first of all, a huge thank you to Western Michigan University for having us, to the Fetzer Institute for being a partner, Professor Foley, President Montgomery for your support of this effort. Manu and I dressed this way deliberately.
Yes, we coordinated.
And we're gonna test you. And if you don't get it right, we're gonna cancel you. It'll be all over social media that you call me Manu. That's what's gonna happen.
I've got
right?
the glasses.
That's right. Brown shoes, black shoes. So I want to begin with this, right? That a diverse democracy for centuries was thought to be impossible. It's something pointed out in Michael Walzer's terrific book, What It Means to Be an American. He begins this section by saying, you know, since the time of the Greeks in Western thought, the notion was that if you wanted a democracy, a society in which people participated in their government, right, you had to have homogeneity. If you wanted diversity, it had to be under a dictator. And that dictator would squelch identity, right? But everybody had to be of the same race, ethnicity, and especially religion in a participatory society. So he ends that section and he begins the next one with these lines, until the United States of America. And I remember reading that in my early 20s and just being blown away. Just being blown away that as Caitlin Flanagan said on Yasha Monk's podcast, the European founders, and by the way, I think America has many foundings, right? Mm-hmm. But one of those foundings is the European founders of 1776. The European founders weren't coming out of the modern world. They were coming out of the feudal world. They were inventing the modern world. Did you expect them to get it right from the jump? I'm totally serious, right? So there were sins and there were mistakes. And yet the idea that people coming from the four corners of the earth, praying together, praying in different ways, including not at all, could come to a single patch of land and build out of a nation, that is a totally new idea, at least in Western civilization. And I think where it is as an opportunity to be instantiated most purely is on a college campus. Because you have all of these identity groups in close quarters, engaged in what I geekily call the genius of the American civic, which is to say, in a set of activities in which where most people agree is a good thing, education, health, recreation, right? And the kind of activities guide cooperation. It's the genius of the American civic. And so if we can't get this right on college campuses to build what my friend Jake Schrum, college president, calls a community of considerate conversation, right? A place where people can, and by the way, this is new in human history, a place where people can deepen into their own identity and be in positive relationship with people from other identities and cooperate together to enrich everyone. The bumper sticker version of this is simple. Respect, relate, cooperate. That's the bumper sticker version of it, right? But in human history, it's totally new. It's totally new. We have a metaphor for this at my organization, a potluck supper, which I'll get to in a minute. But I want to just name the achievement and the opportunity. The achievement and the opportunity. This isn't to say that the point is not it was great from the jump. The point is it had so much potential and therefore we have such important work to do.
Thanks for that, Eboo. And judging by that and judging by the seriousness of our headshots, you can tell who the smarter one is. I would just...
You look like you're on a great hike.
I know, just like we were on today. I just want to say a couple things before I actually jump into it. The first is I'm so incredibly grateful to the entire Western staff, everyone that I got to meet. I feel like by the end of this, I've become a member of the staff. So it is amazing to meet you, and I would name everyone, but I think we would run out of time. Dr. Foley, thank you for moderating. Thank you to the Fetzer Institute for sponsoring, as Eboo said. And most importantly, and many of y'all don't know this, but I have deep respect and admiration for Eboo for two reasons. One is he chose the same suit as me. But second and more importantly is that he's been a fantastic mentor for someone that got started in a very similar journey. And one thing that you'll notice during this conversation is that I would love to provide more of that student perspective, what's happening on the ground as I graduate in 2020. And I think what you'll see is we have this interesting sort of way to look at our current moment. And then the second thing is Eboo's book has been one of the most informative books I've read this year. And I don't just say that. As Eboo knows, I texted him a few times when I found things that were important. And so if you're a young person and you're thinking about building something, this is a great place to start. It is really a how-to guide on how to build. So I wanted to start with that and just start with some deep gratitude. I would just say a couple of things. You know, and I had some conversations today with a lot of the staff and administrators on campus. I think what we have to think about is, as a young person, what is the market? Who's the quote-unquote consumer that we're selling civic discourse to, or respectful engagement, or considerate conversations? Who is the person that's going to adopt what it is that we're talking about? And usually, with broad generalizations, young people right now on cross-polling are reporting record levels of apathy, record levels of disengagement, record levels of disenchantment with the structure of democracy itself. So the question becomes, how do you approach an audience that is already primed either to be completely disengaged, because we've got to be STEM majors and we got to avoid all this, or to be highly engaged, because that is the way that we create change. And as Eboo is saying, I think it starts with the fact that we have to articulate that we live in the most ambitious, not greatest, not worst, most ambitious democratic experiment in the history of humanity. As Eboo was saying, I was doing some Googling right before this to contextualize the American story with the broader story of empires and countries and nation states. The Chinese Empire, Dr. Foley, lasted for 1,500 years. The Roman Empire lasted for approximately 1,200 years. Athenian democracy lasted for approximately 250 years. We're not at the end of the American story, we're at the beginning. In 2026, the United States is going to enter its 250th anniversary. What we have to understand is that, as Eboo is saying, we're not just inheritors of a democratic experiment, we lead this democratic experiment. And we've got to lead it in bold directions. And diversity and being able to tackle the fact that we live in a society that is so different, which, as you were saying, has never existed before, is one of our biggest challenges. So I'm very excited to get into the latter parts of the book, and as you're going, and I know you've got a lot of questions, but I would just say that we have to center young people in this conversation of what are the students thinking and saying? Why are they approaching? Why are they so resistant to this work? Because I think that spells a lot of the answers to the question.
I still like to think of myself as a student. It's still kind of crazy to me that I'm in the professor chair and not the student chair. When I was a student, we talked about, or I was taught about the melting pot, right? And that is the greatness of the American experiment, is that we all come together and merge our identities and get along, like that restaurant, the fondue restaurant, right? Isn't it the melting pot? Is it still around? And then it all tastes great, right? Because we're all merged together. Eboo's organization promotes instead the idea of the potluck dinner. And I will let him define more of the term, but I want to throw out that this is a great chance to talk more about what it means to be a potluck, but then I also want to engage with the concept too. But if the potluck is a space where we bring our diverse identities and perspectives and also cooperate with each other. Political science says that with diversity can come increased social distrust, right? And that we might trust more people who we encounter in a more homogenous setting, and that if we are truly embracing the idea of a potluck, then we risk leadership that could promote or sow social distrust. And like it or not, a large portion of Americans identify with some leaders who perhaps exacerbate these divisions. But if we're a potluck and we are coming together with the goal of cooperation and appreciation around identity, how do we communicate with people who we feel like are not entering into the same kind of social agreement that we are, one of cooperation? And to put it in Eboo's own words from his book, what is the best way to communicate? To what language should you speak to maximize the chances that you're understood to perhaps someone who you feel like is not also coming at it in the same good faith way of an interaction?
Great. So there were like 4 questions there.
Yes,
I'm going to answer the
my job.
easiest. Yeah.
Leave the rest to
Yes,
Manu.
that is totally what I used to just how
take the
smart he was. Right? So I'll be a little geeky about this for a minute, but the melting pot metaphor, it actually emerges in the United States in 1908, 1909. Okay. It was from a play by a guy named Israel Zangwill called The Melting Pot. And famously, Teddy Roosevelt was at one of the shows, and he leans forward in the chair and he says, that's it, okay? So let me do something a little counterintuitive. The melting pot metaphor was a step forward for 1909. Mm-hmm. Okay. So part of what was happening in the world at the time was there was significant antagonism in Europe between a variety of ethnic, religious, national groups. Those groups, diasporas were moving to the United States, large quantity of immigration at the time, and one of the major concerns in the United States is, are we going to have battles between Catholics and Protestants, German and French, outside of Pittsburgh the way we do outside of Paris? And Israel Zangwill's solution was melt your conflicts from Europe into the American melting pot, into the great American crucible, right? The problem is you get your identity melted in there as well. So I grew up with the melting pot metaphor as the dominant metaphor, not just in my history books, but in my life. And here's my story of that. So in high school, my mom started making biryani for Thanksgiving instead of turkey. Biryani is an Indian Muslim feast food, right? And it's super flavorful, right? Can you guess how many people I told at Glenbard South High School in Glen Ellen, Illinois, 25 miles west of Chicago, that we had biryani for Thanksgiving in 1989? Guess, take a wild guess. Melting pot. Melting pot, right? You melt your identity into the dominant culture, okay? So I think right now we have a version of identity work which I would call a battleground. And I don't think it's especially healthy. I think it's an assumption of antagonisms between different groups. I think it has 2 roles. Some people are the aggressors and other people are the wounded. And the people with my skin color are supposed to be wounded. But honestly, I think I'm mostly muscles, brain, bones, and vision. And I don't want to talk about my wounds all the time. And so I'd much prefer a different metaphor. I'd much prefer the metaphor of a potluck. And I love that the Fetzer folks are here, that they're partners in this, because a huge part of what Fetzer does at a national and global level is it tries to tell a different story, recognizes that we follow, as Walter Lippmann says, I quoted in the book, what the story that is told will govern at any moment what humans will do. If you think about American democracy as a potluck, okay, so what's a potluck? A potluck requires people to contribute. You assume everybody's a contributor. You don't walk around to the people you invite and say, I know all the reasons that you can't bring a dish. That's crazy. And actually, it's insulting. It's insulting. You assume that people are contributors. Do you want a homogenous group of people to come to your potluck? As much as I love biryani, I don't want to eat only biryani, right? You want a diversity of people to come. And you want them to bring the gifts and contributions and dishes that are a distinctive contribution from their variety of backgrounds. Now, are there things that make it harder for people to contribute? Absolutely. Does racism, sexism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia exist? Absolutely. Those are barriers to people's contributions. We should be honest about that. We should seek to erode and eliminate those things, but they don't define who people are. As I tell my kids all the time, you're not defined by hating Islamophobia, you're defined by loving Islam. right? Islamophobia is a barrier, but it's not internal to who you are. It does not define who you are. And what makes a potluck really special, it's when somebody's great crusty bread recipe from Eastern Europe connects with somebody else's great spicy dip recipe from South India, and those two get together and they're like, man, this is great, right? Seriously, right? Seriously. And we've all been at these things. That's part of the beauty of a potluck, is that there are a million ways it could go wrong, but it almost never does. Right? This is part of the practical beauty of American civic life. Things typically go right in a Little League, at a Habitat for Humanity build, at a YMCA, at places where people are invited to bring their best dish and to cooperate with others so that their best dish is made better by other people's best dish, right? The American potluck, we're a potluck nation. That's kind of our metaphor, our vision for American diversity. And I think each one of those dimensions matter. We call it respect, relate, cooperate. You respect and welcome the distinctiveness of people's diverse contribution. You encourage people to relate positively across difference, including disagreement, and you facilitate cooperation to take ownership of the common good. And when I used to do potlucks a bunch in my early 20s, part of what I loved was that a set of folks would come early to help set up. A set of folks would stay late to help clean up. So the community was taking responsibility for the health of the whole. Final thing I'll end with, no mayor, with all respect, no governor, no president, with all respect, no general requires people to potluck. We just do it ourselves, right? And that's the genius of a democracy. It's what people do themselves.
Thanks for that, Eboo. And you know, I think what's interesting about this moment, and I think what I spend 90% of my time thinking about, and you know this, is then why is it not working? You know, why is it so hard for us to sometimes have that potluck? Why are people resistant to either showing up or to holding one that is inclusive by their definition but not inclusive for everyone else, whatever that means, whether it is you're a liberal and there's folks that are there that you feel like belong, but then some folks can't, or you're a conservative and there's some folks there that you can't belong with. And then, you know, you've got intergenerational conflict. And one of the interesting things that I found, and I'm curious what your thought is on this, and Dr. Foley, if you've got any thoughts on this, is thinking a lot about why are people so resistant to diversity and change? Why is there this notion of being resistant? Because if it was easy, it would have been done already. It wouldn't have taken 2,500 years post AD for that to happen. And what we found is we've got chapters in Europe with Bridge Europe, Bridge Africa, Bridge USA. You've got people in tribes in Nairobi, Kenya, and then you've got amazing young people in Stuttgart, Germany. And you know, we've seen conflict in India itself. It seems like anxiety towards change, it seems like anxiety towards someone that looks different than you is a human thing. It seems like it's something that we've got to figure out how to get past. And what I'm nervous about is that we've built a culture where the response to someone's anxiety towards change is punitive. It's not open. When we create a society where someone that wants to express their deep-seated fear, let's take not an American example, but let's take a Kenyan example. Our Kenyan, the CEO of Bridge Africa, Belinda Odek, fantastic young woman. She's 26 years old. She was giving us a story where her tribe and her village have been there for hundreds of years. And suddenly what happened one day was that the government created some permits and the other tribes started opening up some shops. They started opening up some weaving salons. They started building local bazaars. And the thought was, well, it's great for the economy, it's getting along. In fact, her tribe responded with equal resistance. And oftentimes it was couched in ethnic tensions, but really it was this deep-seated fear that there's a taco stand opening up in my block, or there's an Indian coming down to the soccer practice where there's only been white kids. My thought and my question is, how do we create openness and space for people to be able to externalize their anxieties in a way that is not punitive, creates openness for them, but at the same time, it allows us to build something that's more productive and valuable. So I don't know. I guess I asked a question, but that's something that I've been wrestling a lot with. Is there is an anxiety towards change. The question is, how do we resolve that anxiety so that it reaches the most amount of humans possible? I don't know what we do with that.
Well, it makes me think of the potluck again, that potlucks are not punitive, right? If you burned your chicken, nobody turns you away at the door.
Yeah.
You know? And that too often I find in my classroom, students are afraid of the punitive comments they might get in response to an opinion or a statement or an identity that they have. But truly, if we're accepting of whatever contribution you bring to the potluck, then we're still supposed to, peel off the carbonated part of the chicken. As a person who can't cook, I really identify with this position too. But we're not supposed to turn some away at the door because of how we perceive the contribution that they're making.
Do you mind if I add something to that?
Yes.
I don't. Okay, good. So it's interesting. So I took this road trip from Austin to Boston. One of the weird things I do is I get in the car and just try to understand what it means to be an American. Surprise, it means something different to everybody. And went from Austin to Boston. We went from Austin, Texas to Lake Charles, Louisiana, then out to Meridian, Mississippi, Selma, Alabama, up through Georgia, went to South Carolina, Debbie County, then went up north to North Carolina, Fayetteville, then we went to DC, then we ended in Boston. And there were three things that almost everyone said in various ways. The first was that our democracy and our political moment sucks. And we want people to get along. We want people to solve problems. We want people to stop dividing people for profit and actually care about solving the issues that affect all of us. The second was that I want to raise some sort of stable family so that I can lay the roots for my generation. And the third thing was that I want to live in a safe environment where I can prosper and feel like my kids can also capture opportunity better than I can. Folks, we don't live in a complicated political situation. People want similar things. The challenge was that when we would go to different houses in different areas and knock on different doors and ask people, well, what drives you? What is the reason why you want that? What does that mean? Let's peel a little bit deeper. What it turned out was that when you bring the human into the conversation, some of the students are here, and when we were doing dinner yesterday, the first question we asked was, what do you most care about? When you can bring the human out in a conversation, it is profound, especially with the people that you believe are most disagreeable. Because Twitter is not a real space. Society is. So we can't let our social media perceptions cloud the way that we perceive people. Because people are people, and they're looking for similar things. The question of whether or not we can break through the noise.
This is related to our conversation, but I think that, again, as a college professor, I pick up this immediately talking with the two of you and meeting you earlier. And I want to, as someone who advises internships, make it more explicit for the audience, because this is something I tell to my students all the time is critical as you're moving through the world as a young adult, making your first series of decisions. And that is finding mentors. Obviously, Manu, with all of your seasoned years, you've been able to mentor young Eboo here, and a joke from earlier.
It's a long career of 2 years. I know it's really.
But tell me about the way that the two of you met and connected over work, and then how your relationship, your personal and professional, has progressed from there. And if you could answer it in a way that provides practical advice for students who are heading out into the world with dreams and aspirations, who need to connect with people who have maybe traveled those paths before and can mentor them and guide them in a way similar to the relationship that you've had.
I just want to really ask him, how annoying was I on the first call?
You're not annoying. No. Dude, honestly, people who have a concrete vision and are committed to making it happen and are super smart, it's a no-brainer, right? It's a no-brainer to spend time with you.
I appreciate that. I wish my mom heard that. So
I think this is being recorded.
Good. Let me just say this, and this is something we'd said in the faculty lunch earlier today, which is just two pieces of practical input. How can we get students engaged? How can we help? How can we create mentorships and relationships? Emma, who I think works on the staff of Western, had raised this amazing point, which is that a lot of young people have tremendous leadership capacity. They either don't know it or haven't had someone that brings it out of them. And the second thing is that we live in a moment where young people are really excited, ready to roll. The question is whether or not we can channel our energies towards some sort of productive endpoint. Look to your left, look to your right, go to your local communities. There are young people that you know, and reach out and create space for them. Eboo did this in an amazing way for me, provided an amazing set of advice and resources. And then it's up to the people that are getting the advice to make the most of that. The last thing I would say is I am not who I was 3 years ago without the mentors that I did not have. I was a very introverted pre-med student that had no interest in politics. It's because folks found leadership potential and then inculcated that. And so I think it's something that all of us can do.
Two points. One is, I think the single most dangerous thing about cancel culture is that you kill your mentors. Yeah. Like if what you are doing is, and I don't get that vibe here at all, right? So I'm making a statement that's not relevant to the people here, but outside of here. If the way in which you approach somebody is to constantly tell them what they are doing wrong, and you're 22, like the way the relationship should work with somebody that you respect or admire. I'm not talking about the people who should be canceled. There's some people who should be canceled, right? But if you mispronounce my name, I'm not canceling you. I'm just telling you how to pronounce my name, right? Like, there's some things that should just be simple. There are so many situations within institutions in which a set of people is just revolting against the senior folks, and the decision the senior folks make is, I just can't spend time with you. And this is like, you've heard of quiet quitting. This is the senior version of quiet quitting. Like, I will listen politely to your rage, and I have made a decision. You are not available for my leadership, right? And so I am really, I was a rageful young person, but I grew up in a culture in which adults are adults. We're adults. And here's what I mean by it. I'll tell a very concrete story. So I remember taking a Latino studies class my final year of college. And by week 2 or 3, it was like 30 students in the class, 27 were Latino, and I was one of the only non-Latino kids, right? So I would constantly bring up, like, how come we're not talking about Asian Americans? How come we're not talking about African Americans? How come we're not talking about gay people? Every class, I'd raise minor hell about this stuff. Week 6 or 7, professor calls me up after class one day, super gentle guy, very, very quiet. He says to me in his quiet way, he's like, Mr. Patel, you make some interesting points, and perhaps people would listen to you more if you weren't such a jerk. I'm really grateful for that guy. I'm totally serious, right? I'm totally serious. And I think to myself, now, in this era, he wouldn't have said that. No. There's no way.
Not pre-tenure.
There's no way. There's no way. And how much would I have missed out of? I remember professors who called me up and say, Mr. Patel, you should try understating your case. But that was such good advice. Such good advice, right? And I'm actually deeply concerned with crazy levels of self-righteousness where senior people are like, you are not available for my leadership. I think that this is a silent crisis in American institutional life. It's a silent crisis because the senior person's not telling you what they're not giving you. They're just not giving it to you. Manu, what I'm doing for you is normal. Mm-hmm. Like somebody who started an organization 25 years ago, who sees a young person starting an organization now, And it's like, I know the path you've walked, and you call me 4 or 5 times a year and I talk to you, that's normal. That's not special, that's normal, right? And it seems special because it doesn't happen that often these days. And one of the reasons is because if you're just getting raged at all the time, just like, all right, I am supposed to sit and listen politely, I will do that, I will nod, and that's it. I think that that's a problem. I think that that's a problem.
And I just want to add something to that. This is specifically for the young people that I work with and my generation. It is easy to have this weird aura of self-righteousness when you can just point to a lot of these problems in society, say the old folks have done this, and I hate to break it to you, but the 60s was one of the most progressive generations in the history of the United States. From the anti-war protests to the Martin Luther King marches to free speech cafes, but those were on the left those days. They're in power right now. What I mean to say is that you might think that you're on the right side of history. Just look up. And so intellectual humility is something that we have to hammer in, and we have to create the social permission for.
I'm going to tell one more professor story. This is laudatory of your profession, Dr. Foley, because I learned so much. I mean, really, like, universities change the world. They really do. They changed my, Andy Del Banco in his great book, College, he says, if you were to list any of the jewels of American civilization, jazz, baseball, the Constitution, colleges would be in the top 10, easy. I just think that's really powerful. Like, you are in one of the jewels of American civilization. That's really beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to know, right? So let me tell you, so I go to college in the 1990s, and I'm coming out of the melting pot paradigm, and I hear language like white supremacy and institutionalized racism and colonialism, and it makes a sense of a part of my experience that I never got to talk about in high school. And so it connects a bunch of dots for me, and it puts together a narrative, and I just rage for a set of years. Something useful in that, for me when I was 19, right? So I get a fancy scholarship and I go off to Oxford and I'm doing my doctorate. I'm interested in research on a group of South Asian young people in London. And what's my hypothesis? My hypothesis is that their lives have been profoundly shaped by racism the way that my life is profoundly shaped by racism. And so I'm an ethnographer. I'm asking them all of these questions about how their lives were shaped by racism. I'm not getting much back in return. Right? And so I'm taking field notes on all of this, right? I've got my theories, and then I'm taking field notes. And one day I have a long meeting with my PhD advisor, and I'm like almost in tears. I'm pulling my hair out, and I'm like, I'm just not asking the questions right. Like, they're not telling me their stories about racism. I've tried to ask it this way and that way, and my PhD supervisor was like, well, maybe your worldview's wrong. Maybe the paradigm that you came in with explained your life, but it doesn't explain their life. And he's like, let me tell you the cardinal rule of academic life. The world is always more complicated than your worldview. I'm going to say that again. The cardinal rule of academic life. The world is always more complicated than your worldview. You never squeeze the world into your worldview. You don't deform the world to fit into your worldview. You see if your worldview explains parts of the world, and if you find that the world exists outside of the worldview, you adapt and expand your worldview. That's the beauty of academic life, right? And I just thought that it was so simple and clear and beautiful. Like, oh yeah, I have the opportunity to expand my worldview. I have the opportunity. This is where viewpoint diversity is so important. Viewpoint diversity isn't just about different identities. It's about, ready for the geekiness, diverse explanatory paradigms. Diverse explanatory paradigms. And so, as an intellectual, you're supposed to have multiple explanatory paradigms. And sometimes feminism illuminates things. Sometimes Burkean conservatism illuminates things. Sometimes a center-left view illuminates things. But the point is, the reason you have multiple explanatory paradigms is because the world is more complicated than all of them put together. And your job is to actually describe and explain the world. It's not to deform the world to fit into your worldview.
I want to make sure that we leave room for people in the audience to have a chance to ask questions. I do believe that we have a roving mic somewhere. So please, this is a potluck, and everything that you want to say or curiosity that you have, we're all here asking questions and approaching everything with an open mind. And we have two people who have thought a lot about these issues and might enlighten your question in a way that benefits the whole group. So please don't be shy to raise your hand, and we'll bring a mic over to you so that we all can hear what you have to say.
Or your question might enlighten us. So please.
Hi, I've got a son who's 30, and one of the things I hear from him a lot is not only does he find it hard to deal with groups like at work that all agree with the same thing, and it's hard to get into a conversation about anything real because you don't want to be the outsider. But he's also having to deal with all of the barriers that are put up by the way business runs. You know, he's hired, now he's on furlough, he may get laid off. It has nothing to do with how good of a job he did. And I'm wondering if you've given any thought to that combination of culture plus this dehumanizing effect of corporate America.
And I'll try to be super quick so we can get through as many questions as possible. I think there's two parts to your question there. The first is, you said that your son said that he thinks he's an outsider. The fact is that we all feel like outsiders. There's a value in recognizing, and this is something we were talking about yesterday, is we have to create the social permission for people to be wrong. We have to create the social permission for people to be able to say, you know what, I'm confused about that, because believe it or not, someone next to you is as well. I'll give a quick story. I was in a classroom. This was right after we'd started Bridge Berkeley. We were sitting in this classroom. We had 15 kids. This one student starts standing up and starts yelling at the professor, saying that they believe that they were the bell hook stuff that you write about in your book. And the student on the other side stands up and starts arguing with them. The other 13 of us are completely quiet. We're quiet. We all left that classroom assuming that each of us must be on one side or the other. Little did we know that when we interacted afterwards, we all were pissed off. It only takes one person to say, I'm also the outsider. Let's have a conversation about it. And the second thing about corporate workplaces is politics and business are no longer separate. So this work is not just about democracy in a political sense. This is this is about democracy in a very people sense.
Good evening. My name is Victor Green. I'm going to give my title only reference to the question. So I'm one of the Assistant Chiefs of Police in Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety. And since 2020, we've been trying to figure out how do we bring the community and police together to prevent this us versus them. You brought up a question earlier, or a statement, that the bottom line is fear, or when we talk about differences and everything. What would you suggest? How do we explore going into that fear to get to the point of having dialogue, or a safe space to have dialogue?
Well, Victor, I got to say, first of all, thank you for your service, genuinely. And from the minute I stepped on campus, I've just heard like one name 100 times, and it was your name. And just the respect that people on this campus and this community have for you, and for the institution that you've built, and the way that you are leaning into hard things. I just thank you for that. Right? It's a model. It's a model, really. Look, I think when it comes to public safety, I think part of the benefit is that there's a shared goal here, right? And if we so nothing I'm going to say is genius here, but I think maybe in the simplicity there's something useful. Public safety is a shared goal. There's a variety of institutions that contribute to public safety. Families, schools, community centers, athletic leagues, police officers, we all contribute to public safety. How do we do this in a way that is as cooperative as possible? The goal is not hard. There's actually many instances in which people don't have a shared goal, right? In public safety, we typically do have a shared goal. Now there might be things in the weeds that we disagree about, like, is that group that's being super loud, does that feel menacing to me, or is that just part of the community, right? So in the weeds, there are some differences, but generally speaking, do you want a safe community where people can walk freely and engage openly, et cetera, et cetera. So what does it look like to put the shared goal at the table, to recognize that it's a shared responsibility and that lots of people are responsible for it, and people play different roles here, and the police have a really important role, right? And look, you're the only ones who run to the bullets. You know, I want to tell you a personal story. My wife is a civil rights attorney and did mostly 1983 work, right? And can I tell you something? Like, whenever she hears about a police officer who is shot or hurt, like, she literally cries. She literally cries. When Ella French was shot in Chicago, my wife wept. And she does that because she sues police officers because she honors the uniform, because she thinks that the job is so honorable and so difficult that people who soil the uniform with actions should be held to account so that the rest of the officers can be vaunted in the manner that they ought to be, right? I love that. I love my wife, and I just love that approach to it. Like, I honor this work, and therefore people who violate the honor and the code of it, we need to make an exception of them. But this is not about the whole, right? And so I just think to elevate shared hope. You know, I come out of Obama world, right? To elevate our job is to elevate shared hope and to make it as motivating and inspiring as shared fear would be, and to say we all have a role in this. And that's the potluck metaphor, right? Like, if you don't bring your dish, we don't have a potluck. If you don't bring your dish, we don't have a potluck. Mayor has his hand up. I think he's mad at you, Professor Foley. Joke.
He got the mic already.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
All right. I am concerned that we are creating an infrastructure of communication that is not reinforcing this kind of conversation or even this way of having a conversation. And it reminds me a little bit of how our capacity as human beings, we find ways to destroy ourselves, whether you're talking about creating nuclear weapons, and we've had threats of the use, recently. And I wonder, how do you accommodate this idea that we are creating an infrastructure that has built-in algorithms to reinforce the exact opposite kind of interactions from what you're talking about here? How do you work in that kind of environment and make a difference in that space?
You guys say a couple things on this and then turn it over to you.
This is a big question. It's an important one. So yeah, you go and then I'll go. Yeah.
So, look, I think social media is a cesspool on Mars, right? And it's actually serious stuff. So I was just at the Nantucket Project, and a huge theme of the Nantucket Project was how social media is designed to bring out our worst. And there's a term in Islam, our nafs, our lower self, right? And I'm constantly telling my kids, the struggle is against your lower self. And the way you engage in that struggle is you put yourself in situations that elevate yourself, that bring out your excellence, your ihsan, your higher self, right? And as soon as you enter 90% of social media, it is designed to bring out your nafs. And it's actually, so at the Nantucket Project, I learned crazy things. Do you know that Facebook knows with a 70% accurate rate who is going to commit suicide? Because they know from their posts how the patterns go, right? They've all the data for suicidal ideation. Right? Look, what we are doing, I think Manu presents this really compellingly. It's one of the things you do brilliantly is we are countercultural right now. It's pretty cool, right? So creating spaces where it is easier for people to cooperate, that's the counterculture, right? engaging somebody who disagrees with you and saying, thank you for telling me that. That's the counterculture, right? And I'm like a major believer in American civil society, and I'm a religious person, so like I know the Jesus movement grows from like 6 people to a third of the world, right? I know that the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, like the reason people convert to Islam is because of the dignity of his example and the beauty of the Quran, right? And so I really believe in those things. And I believe David Brooks when he says the way the world changes is some people find a better way to live and other people follow them, or other people copy them. So I think we do our work. We engage with Ihsan with a sense of excellence and a sense of dignifying other people, and then we tell the story, right? We tell the story. There's other people. I met Tristan Harris at the Nantucket Project, like the guy who made the movie, what's it, The Social Network?
Dilemma.
Yeah, The Social Dilemma. So there's other people who are like engaging structurally on that. I think that's super important. Super important. That's not my work, right? I want to cultivate spaces where it is easier for people to cooperate, for people to think of that as part of the jewel of our civilization, for people to think of that as not just pragmatic, but sacred, and then to elevate that as much as possible. But yes, there are structures that are working against us. I think the one thing I would say, and this is a little bit in response to Manu, is I don't compare America to heaven, right? America's a long way from heaven, but as Obama said in his Howard University commencement address in 2016 to a group of black graduates, is there another time and place you would prefer to have been born? So this is still a nation with great potential. Like, we can have this conversation and not be surveilled in a way that's punitive, and we can create alternatives, and we can go build that. I think that's enormously powerful. And the vast majority of human beings now, and certainly in the past, have not had that. And I actually think the way that college presidents should begin their convocation addresses, this is totally countercultural, is you are amongst the luckiest human beings in human history. What can we do with that? You're amongst the luckiest people in the history of the human condition. What can we do with that, right? And it's true. It's objectively true. So what can we do with that?
I just want to add 2 quick things to this, because I think this is a very important question. And starting with where Eboo left off, I think I'm very much interested when it comes to the social media question, because both of us work more on the people side and not the institution side when it comes to that equation, on the role that we play in this equation. Because the fact is that you ultimately click the like button. You know, we're clicking the retweet button. It's ultimately our agencies there. I think that this is a problem, and we may differ, I'm not sure, but I think this is a problem that requires a multi-stakeholder approach. We meet with social media companies all the time. Social media companies will say, it's your fault, you're the one that's liking it. You're the one that gets excited by angry things, and so you're sharing it. They'll say, the news companies, y'all are the ones that are typing out crazy headlines because we've got to meet our click rate, and we have to make sure that we have a business model. The news companies will say, well, that's because the algorithms are engineered that way. And then the people will say, well, it's all the algorithms' fault. The fact is that we're in a moment of complete bucking of accountability. And so I'm interested in what we can do as people. There's 2 things I think we can do. The first is we have to understand that the incentive structures in society, as Eboo's saying, I love the way of framing this as countercultural. It is not to your social incentive to unite. It is to your social disincentive to empathize. Right now, on this campus, any campus, if I wanted to make the most amount of friends, and I wanted to get out there and say the craziest things, and I wanted the biggest circles, and I wanted the rowdiest people out there to come to my table, I would divide. I have no incentive to say this stuff. 0. So it is a question of how we rebuild those social incentive structures to ensure that we as people are not falling into the traps that they're laying out for us. And what I can say, and this is second, is their algorithms are positioned for engagement. Who's engaging? Us. How do we engage? With our fingers. What does that entail? Well, let's be conscious. The same way that we built a food diet, a nutritional diet, in the 80s and the 90s, the FDA is not like an age-old institution, it's a new thing. When all the junk food came out, we started thinking, how do we actually decide what we consume? Let's create an information diet. We need a media literate Gen Z that is built around an information diet that talks about how we ingest information through our eyes.
Dude, that's brilliant. So in all seriousness, right? Like if you think about it, like I grew up in the '80s, and it was like the era of fast and big everything, and people just thought that that's the way it was going to go. Like snackables, right? Like people turned, you couldn't. It was high convenience, mass quantity, and then there was a set of people who were like, this doesn't feel good in my soul and in my gut. And they built a set of alternative institutions. So Alice Waters builds Chez Panisse, right? So there's a different idea, and then there's a set of institutions built to that idea. And the kind of whole craft movement emerges from there, right? And I think that's enormously powerful. And it's a huge movement. It's a huge ecosystem. And actually, we have older operating systems in our beings. And in Fetzer, this is what Fetzer does. We have an older operating system of how we are in the world. In Islam, it's fitra, it's God's blessing upon you, which it guides how you are meant to be in the world, right? So I agree with you, Manu, that there aren't social incentives for cooperation online. But in this, we all know when we've been a jerk, right? And I believe that God gave that to you, that there's this older operating system within our being that knows when you are kind to somebody, right? That knows when you are kind to somebody, and that it's a beautiful thing.
And it feels good to be kind.
It feels good.
It feels great.
And that is within our. So I'll tell you this crazy. I've never told this story. I'll tell you this story. So, taking my son, he's 13 at the time, and taking him to a first Cubs game. And I don't know, he'd been like a jerk to somebody at school the week before. And so we're having this huge conversation about like the importance of being nice. And he's 13, so you don't talk to him like a 7-year-old, right? But I'm like, listen, like the way it was passed down to me is if you have an opportunity to be nice to somebody, God has given you that opportunity, you take the opportunity. Okay, so we're having this conversation. We get to Wrigley, and we're sitting next to this dude. And he grew up, Native American guy, lived on a reservation in Minnesota. He grew up watching the Cubs in a superstation. And he said, every year I come to Wrigley on my birthday. I drive 8 hours from Minnesota. I stop in Madison for the night, and I come to Wrigley. And I see a game on my birthday. And he's alone, right? And we're chatting, and I'm just thinking about this guy, right? And then what happens? It's like a Disney movie. Here comes a foul ball. And it lands right at my feet. And I pick it up. And the guy just looks at it. And my son Zayd just looks at it. And I look at it. And I'm like, happy birthday, man. Happy birthday. Right? And like, if you have the chance to do something nice, God gave you that chance. Take the chance. God gave it to you, right? And it feels good. It feels good. And I just think like living into that, it's a beautiful thing. Thank you for clapping, Mrs. Montgomery.
Jeff? Oh, you have one more question? It's yours if you want it, Jeff. Right of first refusal.
Everyone just completely agrees. Job done.
Oh yeah, go for it. Yes.
Why should I trust the establishment?
Here, will you say it into the mic?
Why should I trust the establishment?
What is the establishment?
Ooh, I asked the same thing. The government, school administrators, local officials, anyone with authority.
Do you know how to swim?
Yes.
Where did you learn how to swim?
Rhode Island in the ocean, probably somewhere is thrown in. I was swimming before I was walking.
Just throw. Okay, so you're one of those kids.
Sure.
Did you ever play Little League baseball or soccer or anything like that?
No.
You never did any of that stuff?
Never. Like a sport? No.
You're a student here?
Yeah.
Somebody built this place. Somebody dreamed. Somebody 100 years ago thought to themselves, One day there's going to be a kid sitting in the front row listening to Eboo and Manu speak. He's going to ask a question about the establishment. I built this place for him. I'm serious, right? Like there's another way to think about this. I'm not saying your way is wrong. I'm saying all of these things that other people built that we gain from. How amazing is that? Right? Soccer leagues and baseball leagues and YMCAs and colleges, and I just think that's amazing, right? Like somebody scratched out of this unforgiving piece of earth a college, and here you are. Alhamdulillah, praise be to God.
I think that's right on. And I'll say two quick things to this, man. Half of BridgeUSA was built in living rooms where we would, shit on the establishment. And
way to build the bridge.
And actually, this is I'm not even plugging this. I think the book actually does a great job of tackling that question, because I don't think it's about dodging what is the establishment, what isn't. But I'll just say two things with a big claim at the top, which is that the establishment is a moving target. Here's what I mean by that. I would bet my negative net worth that you and I will be the establishment when we're 70. Here's what I mean by that. First, I was reading Nancy Pelosi's biography written by Susan Page. You and I would agree she might be part of the establishment. Great. So Nancy Pelosi in the 80s and 90s was the most progressive congresswoman in the entire country. She pushed LGBTQ rights like no other. She raised an entire campaign without taking a single dollar. And today, she's the establishment. What that told me was I could do whatever it is that I want to do right now, and I will be the establishment. And there's nowhere I'm going that near. And the second thing is, do you know Andrew Yang? Have you heard of Andrew Yang? Yang Gang, yes sir, math. Make America think harder, in case anyone was wondering. Andrew Yang, many of us would consider not part of the establishment. Now, the more and more dinners he goes to and fundraisers he goes to, it's the establishment. It's the price of doing business. That's it. It's something that Eboo's excellent on, which is the price you pay to build things, and the price you pay for pragmatism is not sacrificing your moral courage. It is a pathway to exercise your will. So, there's an establishment, sure, and I'll be the establishment one day. And I mean that not in like this, I literally mean that in our local communities. It's a moving target.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. Thank you both so much for visiting Western, for sharing your time with us. This has been an incredibly engaging conversation, and we all really appreciate your being here. So,
yeah, thanks.
Thank you.